Welcome everyone, I'm Dana Harder, Field Agronomist for Burrus Seed. Today we'll go through the basics of planter prep. As we begin the planter season, we always want to go through, make sure our planter's finely tuned and ready to go, because we know that seed, that's a significant investment for you. So we want to make sure that we're dropping that seed consistently and that our stands are uniform. So from our research here at Burrus, we've noticed that if a plant emerges 4 days later, we see about a 40% reduction in stand from that individual plant. So ensuring that our planter's up to speed and conditioned well, we want to make sure that you get the maximum yield and set you up for success come fall. We'll first examine our double disc openers. That's what's going to create the trench that our seed's going to be dropped into. What we want is a nice V for that seed to lay into so we have good seed to soil contact. If we have too much wear on our double disc openers, we'll create a W and we'll have a little dirt ridge where that seed will drop, and we won't have very good seed to soil contact. So just to quickly look at the tension on our double disc openers, we'll take 2 business cards. We'll slide one from the top between those 2 plates. We'll come down till we can't go anymore with that first card. Then we'll take our second card, come in here from the bottom, and we'll go about right there. And if it's too tight, you can adjust the shims on it or loosen it up. Ideally, what we're looking for is around 2 inches is what we want that separation to be. Again, if it varies from that, we can loosen and tighten it. Some instance, we might have to replace our double disc openers, and we'll take a closer look at that next. So here we're looking at this double disc opener blade up close. If you look here, you can see this bevel. And if that bevel is gone, chances are it's time for a new disc opener to be put on that planter. As your disc blades wear, they will not be tight enough, and you'll see that distance tighten up between those business cards. So what we can do, we can remove these shims on the back side and tighten up that V as well. But again, we want to be mindful of the wear that's happening on our blade. Here we're looking at a Kinsey 3200, and brand new blade will be about 15 inches. So we want to check the wear, measuring the diameter. Here we're coming in at 14 inches and 7/8. If we get down to 14.5, we want to replace this blade. Again, you want to consult your manufacturer on what they recommend for blade replacement. Here we're going to look at our scrapers that are rub against our double disc openers. Again, we don't want to have too much wear because we want to make sure that we're getting all the dirt. If those aren't working properly, we'll have dirt build up and it'll come in and wear some of our other parts prematurely, like our fertilizer and our seed tube. So we want to make sure they're in good working order. Here we'll just quickly look. Here's a worn one. You kind of see how it's coming in. And you kind of have this curve coming in compared to a new one where it's nice and straight. Again, we want at this time examine the seed tube and make sure that they're not busted on the ends, because if we have too much wear, we'll have seed bounce, and we won't have uniform spacing, and therefore we won't have a very uniform stand and not getting maximum yield. Next, we're going to look at our row cleaners, and in some instances you might have a no-till coulter up in front there. What to make sure when you get out in the field is that we're not creating a trench or a ditch that we're putting that seed into. We just want to remove the debris and just get rid of all the trash on front of that row. If we go too deep, we're going to create a ditch where all that water will concentrate, maybe leading to poor germination if it's cold and wet conditions. In terms of a no-till coulter, if you drop that down on a board in your shop, we want your no-till coulters to be about a ½ inch higher than the bottom of your double disc openers. So next we're going to look at our gauge wheels, and what we want here is that we want to make sure that they move freely and that they spin freely. So that way we don't have any worn bearings or anything like that. They also should be snug when they're up in the up position against that double disc opener so we don't have any dirt or debris getting in there. Every planter is different in terms of how they adjust depth. So again, consult your manufacturer. But one key thing to look at is your stops. So we don't want to make sure we don't have any premature wear or cracks here, because if they're worn, we want to achieve the depth that we're setting up for. One thing we also want to check for is make sure that we don't have any movement from side to side. This should be nice and tight. And on this bushing, we want to check for wear, so that way they're going true and parallel to that row. Here we're wanting to make sure that our row's lined parallel with our row here. We want to make sure that all components from our double disc openers, our gauge wheels, and to our closing wheels are all parallel to that trench. Taking a look, putting this flag down, make sure it goes right through the closing wheels to the seed tube and coming down and splitting our closing wheels. Here you might notice we have some aftermarket closing wheels. Again, we want to follow the manufacturer's guidelines. If we don't have them spaced appropriately, they can come in and be really aggressive. In some instances, pinch that row, which we do not want. We want to make sure that we don't have any sidewall compaction. And in some instances, it might throw the seed out of that trench. To adjust, to make sure if these are a little cockeyed, we have cams on both sides to kind of make sure that those are parallel to our closing row. If we have any torque or twist to it, we can create sidewall compaction, which will impede those roots of that growing plant. So next we're going to look at our parallel linkage and see if there's any play in the row unit. So we can quickly do that by just coming to the back here and giving it a good shake from side to side. If there's too much play, it's usually because we have wear on our bushings. Here with this Kinsey, if we were to have a split row, we had units in the front, those bushings are more likely to wear quickly than one if a row is being pulled by that planter. Here we're going to look a little closer at our parallel arms. Again, there shouldn't be any twist or torque. They should be parallel to each other like the name says. We want to check for wear right here and on the stop. And if we have too much wear, you might see a little unevenness in our row units as we look across. Again, when you get out to the field, you want to check and make sure that all the row units are pretty uniform across. If we have one down below the other, it might be a sign that our parallel arms are wearing out. Another is your planter depth. We want to make sure that when it's in the field, that it is level. We don't want any tilt. If that tilt happens, chances are we're not going to be putting that seed where we want it to. So one overlooked item, again, we went through all these components. We want to make sure that we have adequate tire pressure. And that's especially true if we have ground-driven planters here. Again, if we have low pressure here, we're not going to achieve the seed depth that we're after if it's uneven across the planter. And lastly, we want to make sure that this tire is making good contact with our drive here so that we're moving those chains and that we're getting the right seeding rate as well. We also want to make sure that our chains are in good condition, that they're properly lubricated. We don't want any rust or additional wear here. And there's so many chains specifically on this planter that we want to make sure that they're in good working order and that when we're turning those meters, we have good contact and good lubrication on those chains. Here we're looking at a Kinsey finger pickup unit. The unit should be able to spin freely with your fingers. What we're looking for here is that each of those fingers lift up and that our brush isn't prematurely worn so that we have good singulation. Also, we want to make sure that this belt is nice and flexible. We don't want to be brittle or any parts missing there. Here we're quickly looking at a Kinsey brush unit for soybean. Again, we want to make sure that all those brushes are tight and we don't have too much fray. If they become too frayed, those beans will knock off the meter there. Additionally, we're looking here at this wear groove right here. We have very little wear and it's not worn through. When you overwinter your planter, we want to take our plates out, and that way we're not putting additional pressure on this brush and making it out of shape. Next, we're going to be talking about soybean size with the Kinsey brush meter. The 60 cell plate, the black plate, is labeled down to 2,200 seeds per pound. But what we find is that when we get around that 2,400 seeds per pound with big soybean, usually the 48 or now the 54 cell plate does a better job in terms of plantability. So be mindful of what your box says for soybean seed size. And if it's lower than 2,400 seeds per pound, we're going to want to go to those bigger plates. Again, consult your manufacturer's guidelines for your planters. There's a lot of makes and models out there in the countryside, and make sure that you're abiding by their guidelines. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully you found some of these tips helpful as you begin to think about that spring planting season. It's always important that that planter's ready to go when springtime rolls around. If you need any other useful tips or information, please reach out to your Burrus representative or your Burrus field agronomist. Thank you.